This initiative is meant to make it easier to choose part-time work and other flexible working arrangements. We're putting it on the ballot because it's a very important issue that few people are talking about. Most flexible work time laws are meant to help people balance work and family obligations, but there are also important benefits to the environment and to employment. Despite all of these benefits, the great majority of American workers do not have the choice of working shorter hours, because in today's economy, most part-time jobs have low pay, no benefits, and no chance of advancement. Most people cannot survive on today's part-time jobs, so they take standard full-time jobs where they have no choice of work hours. There are two types of laws that allow flexible work time. Compulsory laws allow employees to request shorter work hours and require the employer to grant the request unless the employer can show that it would create operational problems. The best known examples are the Dutch and German laws, which have been successful for over a decade. Right-to-request laws allow employees to request shorter work hours and require the employer to respond to the request, but they do not require the employer to grant the request. The best known is the British law called the Soft Touch Law. Vermont and San Francisco recently passed similar laws. A similar law applying to all employees was introduced in Congress in 2007 and has been reintroduced since. It had many co-sponsors, including a senator from Illinois at the time it was first introduced, named Barack Obama. Our initiative calls on the city of Berkeley to pass a right-to-request law. It also has the city write letters to the state and federal government asking them to pass right-to-request laws and to give government employees the right to request part-time work. It will be easier to pass right-to-request laws than compulsory laws, and right-to-request laws do work. One study looked at requests during a 2-year period, and it found that in the Netherlands, which has a compulsory law, employers refuse 10% of requests. And in the UK, which has a right-to-request law, employers refused 11% of requests. Right-to-request laws work almost as well as compulsory laws. We are calling on the City Council to fine-tune the law based on public input so it works for both businesses and labor. For example, small businesses should be exempt because their owners generally do all the hiring and firing, and dealing with these requests could be burdensome for them. Let's start off with the obvious benefits of flexible work time to the family. Our standard 40-hour work week dates back to the Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938, a time when most American families were made up of a working husband and a stay-at-home wife. Today, 63% of families with children do not have a stay-at-home parent, and 90% of the parents in those families say that there are conflicts between their work and family obligations. There's no need to go into too much detail because everyone realizes that the family has changed and it's now difficult for many parents to balance work and family obligations. Today's working parents need more flexibility than working fathers needed in 1938. Now let's look at the second major benefit of flexible work time, the benefit to the environment. Flexible work time would give people the choice of downshifting economically. To use a slogan of the shorter work time movement, people could choose to have more time instead of more stuff. Common sense tells us that if people choose to work less and consume less, they'll also pollute less. Of course, many people cannot afford to work less, but there could be a significant environmental benefit if people who are more affluent chose to consume less in order to work less. Shorter work time could help control greenhouse gas emissions. A study by the Center for Economic Policy and Research found that if Americans worked as few hours as Western Europeans, it would lower our greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. The effect is even more dramatic if we think about which model of work time the developing nations follow. Another study named Hours of Work and the Ecological Footprint of Nations found that shorter hours reduce ecological footprint by even more than you'd expect based on reduced income and consumption, because long work hours and time scarcity lead to more ecologically damaging consumption and lifestyle choices, such as eating fast food rather than cooking for yourself. In the short term, a relatively small number of people would choose shorter work hours, and there would be a relatively small environmental benefit. If we look ahead to the coming century, we can imagine that there might be a powerful movement towards simpler living, as people realize how much damage consumerism is doing to the world's environment. But a movement towards simpler living will never become widespread until people have the choice of working shorter hours, choosing more time instead of more stuff. Now let's look at the third benefit of flexible work time, the economic benefit of creating more jobs as employers hire more people to backfill for those who choose shorter hours. Of course, well-paid workers are more likely to choose shorter hours because they're the ones who can afford it. So these new jobs are likely to be well-paid jobs. The Dutch say that increased part-time work caused what they call the employment miracle of the 1990s, when their unemployment fell from 13% in the mid-1980s to 6.7% in 1996, the lowest level in Western Europe at the time. Government jobs alone could make a big difference. If all of America's civilian federal employees had choice of work time, and if they chose to work as much as the average German employees, it would create about 500,000 new jobs as government hired new people to fill in for the shorter hours. This leads to a fundamental point about our economy. New technology increases what economists call the productivity of labor. As technology improves, workers produce more in an hour. During the 20th century, productivity increased by an average of about 2.3% a year, which means that the average American worker produced almost 10 times as much per hour in 2000 as in 1900. New technology eliminates work by substituting machines for people. We can make up for the jobs lost in 3 ways: by producing more. For example, if productivity increases 2% annually, we can produce 2% more annually. By working less. For example, if productivity increases 2% annually, we could work about 2% less annually. Or some combination of both. For example, if productivity increases 2% annually, we can produce 1% more and work about 1% less annually. During most of our history, we did both. In 1840, the standard full-time job was 6 days per week, 12 hours per day, a total of 72 hours per week. Unions fought for shorter hours just as hard as they fought for higher wages, and a century later, the standard full-time job declined to 40 hours per week. We can see in the graph that the actual hours worked declined pretty steadily from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution through the 1920s. Then hours worked went down sharply because of the Great Depression. Then they went up sharply during World War II. But after World War II, American work hours stopped declining. Today we have the standard 40-hour week of the 1950s. This chart shows the standard work week in manufacturing because we have the best historical statistics about manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs are virtually all full-time, so this chart is a record of what a full-time job meant over history. Today we tend to think that a full-time job is 40 hours per week, period. But the 40-hour job was really an invention of post-war America. If work time had kept declining at its historical rate, a full-time job today would be a bit less than 30 hours per week, and our ecological footprint would be more than 25% smaller than it is. In Western Europe, work hours are still declining. This graph shows the average annual hours for all workers, full and part-time. France and Germany both had much longer hours than the United States in 1950, but now have much shorter hours. France is known for its short work hours, but Germany actually has shorter hours than France. In fact, some of the most successful economies in Northern Europe have the world's shortest work hours: the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Belgium, and Denmark. I mention this because people often say that France's short work hours are hurting its economy, but they don't realize that these very successful economies have shorter hours than France. And which economy has the longest work hours in the Eurozone? Greece, with Europe's most problematic economy. The Netherlands has the shortest work hours at all, 80% as much as the United States, largely because they began creating more part-time jobs in the 1980s and guaranteed employees the right to choose part-time work in 2000. In the year 2010, 48.5% of Dutch workers were part-time, and the number was growing. Ruud Lubbers, who was Dutch Prime Minister when they began to promote part-time work, has said, "The Dutch are not aiming to maximize gross national product per capita. Rather, we're seeking to attain a high quality of life. Because they have the choice, the Dutch can choose the work-life balance that provides them the best quality of life." This is the fourth benefit of choice of work time, a better quality of life. People can choose the work-life balance that makes their lives most satisfying. To summarize, the most urgent reason we need flexible work time is to let people balance their work and family obligations. Being forced to take the 40-hour jobs of the 1950s is a real hardship to today's families. I expect that most people will support this initiative because they see how much it will help working parents. But there are also other benefits of flexible work time. It would give us a cleaner environment, as some people take the opportunity to live more simply in order to have more free time. It would give us more jobs as employers hire new workers to backfill for those who choose shorter hours. And it would give us a better quality of life because people could choose the work-life balance that gives the most satisfaction. We are working on this initiative to get people talking about flexible work time. We think it will become common when people recognize its multiple benefits.